what we're hoping to achieve from this webinar is to provide you with some of the key bits of information regarding the NIRG scheme, but more importantly, it's to make you aware that you're able to contact the MRC with any queries you have or discuss your proposed research. As you see, we've got over 200 people joining the webinar today, and so we know that there's appetite out there for more information and to have that greater engagement. And hopefully this is just the first of multiple events that we want to run throughout this year. As you'll have heard, you will be recording this webinar, and we'll make the recording available on the NIRG web pages later date. So if you know colleagues who weren't able to join today but are interested, please share this more widely. So I'll share my screen now and we'll make a start. So here's an overview of what we'll be covering today. So I'll start by, as I say, providing an overview of the MRC and then the NIRG scheme. I'll then hand over to my colleague who'll be able to talk about how we review applications and what makes a good application. We'll then hear from two NIRG holders about their experiences, and I'm delighted that both Dr. Naomi Keefe-Creef and Dr. Avinash Shenoy have been able to join us today. There'll then be plenty of time to answer questions, and so please use the Q&A function that's available that hopefully you're all familiar with, and post your questions as we're going along, and then at the end, when we've all had a chance to speak, we'll work through those questions and answer them appropriately. We know that applicants who have greater engagement with the MRC are more likely to be successful, and so we're looking at various ways in which we can help to try and facilitate this engagement. So let's begin. So brief background of the MRC. So the MRC, we support research across the biomedical spectrum, from fundamental lab-based science to clinical trials and in all the major disease areas. We have the ultimate aim of wanting to improve human health, and we work closely with the NHS and the UK health departments to deliver our mission and give high priority to research that is likely to make a real difference to clinical practice and the health of the population. UK Research and Innovation, or UKRI, brings together 7 research councils, of which MRC is one of them, along with Innovate UK and Research England. You'll be able to see that a specific part of MRC's mission is to produce skilled researchers. We outlined how we're going to achieve this mission in our delivery plan, which we published in 2019. And as part of this delivery plan, 4 foundations were identified as being central to addressing our vision. So discovery science, new technologies and infrastructure, fostering collaboration, and investing in people. And when I say investing in people, it means we want to support outstanding researchers and strengthen diversity and mobility across sectors and disciplines, build capability, and improve careers for team scientists and technology specialists. The NIRG scheme that we'll be talking about today is supported through the research boards and is part of the wider MRC strategy of investing in people. So the NIRG applications, they're evaluated by the 4 research boards as part of a core board activity, and as well as the Better Methods, Better Research panel. There's no dedicated budget for the NIRG applications. They're evaluated competitively, along with all other grant applications being considered at the board. The MRC also has a number of cross-cutting panels. Probably the one of most interest to this audience will be the Training Careers panel, who handle all the fellowship applications and are also available to advise on career development opportunities. I'd also like to flag that the Applied Global Health Research Board was paused due to budget uncertainty during 2021. We're now picking up the pause activities and hope to relaunch a new funding call imminently. And while it's not possible to apply for the NIRG scheme through the Applied Global Health Research Board, early career researchers are encouraged to apply. And so please do get in touch with that board to discuss your proposed research if that's relevant to you. So hopefully that just provides a very brief overview of the MRC and highlights the importance of supporting individuals within the MRC mission and the delivery plan. So the new Investigator Research Grant, it's one of our schemes available to support individuals seeking to transition to independence. We welcome applications to any of the 4 research boards or to the Better Methods, Better Research panel. Typically, NIRGs are 3 years in duration, and it's not a renewable source of funding. Exceptionally, applications for a longer period of time may be accepted, but only if the case supporting the transition to independence and scientific rationale is sufficiently justified. Conversely, NIRGs do not normally last for less than 3 years, as it's unlikely a shorter period of time would fully enable the transition to independence to be achieved. The MRC will cover up to half your contracted working hours, with the remaining time covered by the host research organization. I'd like to highlight a video on our web pages of the NIRG scheme, and that does a fantastic job of sort of outlining the scheme, as well as talking to individuals either funded through the scheme or who assess the scheme. I think it's around 10 minutes long, and it's well worth having a look if you haven't already. So the MRC recognises that there's different routes available to enable scientists to transition to independence. We actively support varied career paths by providing flexibility in the range of awards we offer to ensure a fair funding system. Here you can see 2 of the other schemes available at this career stage. And if you're interested in either the Career Development Award or the Clinician Scientist Fellowship, please do get in touch with the fellowships team, the team who organise or handle those schemes, and they'd be happy to help. We're aware that it might be confusing about the various schemes available at this career stage, and so this slide shows some of the similarities and some of the differences between those various funding schemes. If we start with the similarities, we've increased the flexibility of our support by removing eligibility criteria based on years of postdoctoral experience. So this allows for variations in career paths and recognises that the speed of career progression can be affected by factors unrelated to a person's scientific potential. There needs to be clear support and mentorship from a host research organisation for all of these awards, and there are no limits on the amount of funding you can request. So we've covered some of the differences. So the NIRG schemes handled via the research boards, as such as no interview. NIRGs, you can claim up to 50% of your time, and they're typically for 3 years in duration, while fellowships are handled by the training and careers team. There is an interview, and it typically covers 100% of your time for a 5-year period. So who can apply? So we have clear guidance on the website of the skills and experience needed to win support at various career stages. So if you click on this website and you click on the transition to independence stage, and it will list the key criteria related to research vision, experience and potential, personal development, leadership, communication, engagement, etc. And by reading through that list, you'll be able to see whether the scheme appears to be appropriate to you. This is a scheme for new investigators, and so you're not eligible if you've had substantial grant income in your own name. The way we class substantial grant income is whether you've had an award of 3 years or more that covers your salary, as well as greater than £50,000 of direct science costs per year. But please do get in touch with us as a programme manager if you have any doubts, and we'll be able to confirm your eligibility as well as be able to discuss potentially your research proposal. And as mentioned previously, there's no cutoff in terms of years of postdoctoral experience, and you do need the support from your host research organisation. We often get asked about the inclusion of co-investigators. So co-investigators are permitted on NIRGs. It just needs to be clear that the applicant is the intellectual leader of the proposed work. And so any co-investigator must be bringing additional expertise outside of the applicant's field. In order to achieve the independence, you should not include your current supervisor or current lab head on your application as a co-investigator. But as you'll see, there's other mechanisms by which, if you want them to be included in the work, potentially as a collaborator, that they can be involved, but just not as a co-investigator. So what can you apply for? So the NIRG scheme, it follows a standard MRC funding model where you'll calculate the full economic cost of your proposal, and the MRC will fund 80% of this. As mentioned before, there's no limit on the funding you can apply for, but the typical full economic cost of a NIRG is under £1 million. But the most important thing to remember is to justify your costs. On the award, you can claim for up to 50% of your salary, the salary of any co-investigators. You can cover research or technical posts are allowed to be included, but not PhD studentships. You'll then also be able to cover the cost of the direct consumables, equipment or travel costs. We recommend that you consult either senior or experienced faculty members or that have experience with the MRC grants or costs. And you should also get in touch with your research office who will be able to provide with guidance and support However, it's recommended that you contact them well ahead of time before submission deadline. So, as I mentioned, a key aspect of any NIRG application is for support from your host RO. This support should be tailored to the applicant's requirements and not just contain generic statements. There's no prescription on what this support should include, but it may be access to lab space, departmental equipment, shared resources, technical staff, students, essentially anything that's going to help you achieve success. A senior academic mentor should be named on the application. This should be someone who has provided the NIRG candidate, supported the NIRG candidate during the development of their application, and who will continue to provide the necessary assistance and support to ensure the success of the research project and to ensure the success of the career development of the applicant. The mentor should not be the applicant's supervisor or current group leader. And it's also worth mentioning that the sort of application quality is regarded as an indication of a commitment from the host research organization. So if the application is weak, then that's an indication that to the reviewers and the panel or board members that the PI did not have sufficient support from the RO in developing the proposal. As part of the application, you'll need to include a letter of support from the host RO. This should be tailored to the individual, so make sure it includes personal details on who you are, on what you want to do, what you want to achieve. Avoid generic statements like career development support will be provided. You need to give concrete examples and detailed explanation of what support will be provided. This slide lists sort of the aspects that should be covered in the letter of support, and further details are available on our web pages. On reference to the final point, RO support following the end of the award, just wanted to highlight that a guarantee for a tenured position is not required, but there should be a clear description of the expectations or requirements to obtain a tenured position. So I will now stop sharing my screen and I'll hand over to my colleague, Dr. Maya Bronfeld, who will be able to talk you through the review process as well as what makes a good application.
Wonderful, thank you. So hello, I will take you through the second part of the presentation, which will focus more on the MRC review process and some general kind of guidelines and suggestions for how to submit an application and how to make sure you submit the strongest application you possibly can. So to start with, we're looking at what is the MRC, how does MRC review and handle your applications? And I think that the first thing to understand is that NIRG applications are considered alongside all other proposals and applications submitted for each round. So they will be considered competitively alongside with our standard research grants and program grants. And if looking at the process at the bottom of the slide here, I'll try to walk you through the timeline so you have a better understanding of what to expect. So our application deadlines are all advertised on our website, and for most of our boards and panels, we will have 2 to 3 application rounds every year. You are more than welcome and you're encouraged to have preliminary conversations with the relevant program manager or board and panel member ahead of applying to make sure that your application is within remit, that you're eligible, or if you have any other issues you might wish to discuss. From the deadline, MRC takes 2 or 3 weeks to do our standard administrative checks. And these are checks for things like eligibility, formatting, remit for the relevant board and council, etc. During this period, we might contact you for any clarifications, or if we have any notes or queries or issues with any of the above. Next, the application goes into peer review. We aim to have a minimum of 3 peer reviewers per application. A NIRG application is usually 3 years, so that's what we use. But beyond the specific numbers of reviewers, which can vary slightly, what we mostly try to make sure is that we cover all the relevant areas of expertise present in the proposal. Following the peer review, the application goes into triage stage. And in this stage, it will be assigned to around 2 board and panel members who will read it and evaluate it together with the peer review comments. And it will be discussed in a triage panel composed of additional 2 or 3 board and panel members that go over all the applications and triage them and decide which one of them are shortlisted and move on to the next stage and which ones are declined at this stage. If your application will be declined, you will receive feedback about your application, the reasons why it was declined, key notes from the board discussion. And at this stage, we welcome you, especially as new investigators, to contact the relevant program manager, whose contact information should be on the email from MRC, and ask for a personal conversation, a personal meeting to discuss this further. This can be very, very helpful in helping you understand what were the issues with your proposal, and also to plan for future applications. For those applications that were shortlisted to move on to the next stage, we will be giving you an opportunity to write a rebuttal for the peer review comments. That's a really short turnaround, so just be aware that this stage is happening and look for it, because we usually have about 1 or 2 weeks to reply to all the comments and write your PI rebuttal. Following this stage, the application will be discussed at the board meeting alongside all of the other shortlisted applications for that round. It will be discussed and scored. And during the scoring or the ranking process, NIRG applications do automatically get something of an uplift, because we do want to support this and consider it a special opportunity for us. If your proposal will be declined and will not be able to be funded at board, again, you will receive the detailed office feedback, and you're invited to contact us and have an even more of an in-depth discussion. At this point, it might be good to kind of mention that MRC funding is hugely competitive. So being rejected or being declined doesn't mean that you're not a good researcher or that your proposal wasn't good. We try to fund the best applications that we can within budget, which is why these conversations with the MRC are even more important going forward. For those applications that are declined, it's important to note, and it's mentioned here in a comment, we do have a 12-month moratorium in which you cannot apply, you cannot submit the same research proposal again. And for NIRG applications, you can apply for a maximum of 2 times as a NIRG. So if you were declined, you can just reapply once. If the proposal is awarded, you will be notified, and your research office will be contacted for further information. So a few things that are important to check before you apply, and it's kind of going more into the nitty-gritty of the application process. So the number 1 suggestion is to do the boring stuff. So before you submit, make sure you look into the funder website and the funding specific funding call, and make sure you understand what kind of research this funder is interested in, what are their strategic aims and what are their goals. Are they funding basic discovery research, applied research? And make sure you are a good fit and your research is good fit. For MRC specifically, you would want to check the remit and strategic priorities for the different boards and panels that we have to make sure that you apply to the correct one. Again, at this stage, we encourage you to speak to our program managers or to the MRC named contacts, which will always be on the website alongside any funding opportunities. So you can look out for those. So eligibility is really, really important. Of course, you cannot apply if you're not eligible. But also you need to think about fit to the scheme. So do you meet the eligibility criteria, and do you also meet the aims of the scheme? Is your research appropriate? And when I'm talking about the boring stuff, I mostly mean the next item, which is be aware of all the required documentation and formatting, because these are very, very important. So stick to the page numbers, stick to the specification of formats or whatever is specified. Make sure that your text is legible and readable. So researchers are often kind of tempted to use really small fonts or really small margins to kind of cram more things into application. And these things tend to backfire. So you want your application to be comfortable to read so people can get as much information from it in a short amount of time as they can. Make sure you are aware of the timelines and submit on time. We cannot be flexible on that, unfortunately. And the key message here is to plan early, really, really, really early. So it can take months to put together more, even to put together an application and get together all the relevant information. You will often need input and help from other people, and you want to engage those as early as possible. Next slide, please. When you're looking at how to apply specifically to MRC, all applications are submitted through a system called JAS. This is true now. It may not be true a year from now because we are looking to go to a different system, but at least for now, this is what we use. So make sure before you apply, or when you plan to apply, make sure that you know how to access the system, that you have access to, or you have created your account. If you don't have an account, then creating one can take a few days. So make sure you do this well in advance and make sure your organization is registered. Although if you're applying from a university, they should all be on our system anyway. So the JAS system, the JAS application form, has multiple different sections you will need to complete, and these may not be obvious if you haven't applied before. So there's things like a summary, a technical summary, academic beneficiaries, communication plans, etc., etc., etc. We really do not have time to go all of them in this webinar. But it's strongly advised that you go into the system well ahead, again, well before applying, and make sure you know all the sections, know what is required of you, and have the relevant information to complete them and enter the correct text. Do not leave this till the last minute to avoid surprises, because this is actually a quite complicated process. Next slide, please. So each application will have additional required attachments beyond the application through JAS, and the list of attachments will be listed on the MRC guidance. And it includes things like the case for support, the justification of resources, etc. NIRG applications will have a few specific attachments unique to them, such as the NIRG template CV, the declaration of research organization, the letter of support. So just be mindful of those. For the NIRG declaration, just to clarify, so all NIRG proposals should include a declaration that the applicant who has originated the research question and written the research proposal, and this should be formatted as a letter of support, but actually written by you. Be mindful that there are additional attachments, not necessarily specific to NIRG applications, and depending on the specific type of research you do, they may or may not be required. So again, read the guidance carefully and make sure you know what you need to attach or what information you need to supply, depending on what kind of research you do. For example, if you work with animals, or if you work with people, or if you conduct a clinical trial, all of these will have different necessary attachments. Just of particular note, I want to mention the reproducibility and statistical annex or index, which, while it is an optional attachment, we highly, highly recommend that you include this in your application, because reviewers and board and panel members often have inquiries about the statistical aspect of your study design. And so this is just an extra few pages that you can use, or an extra one page that you can use to provide more information. And again, make sure to plan early and approach people early, as often you will need their inputs to complete these required attachments, and you want to leave people enough time to do so. Next slide, please. So here we just brought a few. So the MRC website has a blog post about the 12 top tips for writing a grant application. And in this webinar, we just put a few of them that we think would be most relevant to new investigators, but you're welcome to use this link to look at the full article. And I will go over some of them. So the first tip is to tell a compelling story. And it sounds almost weird to think of a research proposal as a story, but it is. You're basically selling an idea to an audience, and you want to make sure that you're giving them an exciting idea, and that you're taking on a serious challenge in your research. So you want to identify the key features of your proposal and tell a convincing narrative linking your experiments to your main aims and ideas. You want to consider your audience when writing this, and this is maybe important to know. So your proposal will be reviewed by people who are experts in your fields, and these are the peer reviewers. But it will also be reviewed by our board and panel members who would have specialties across a wider field and not necessarily in your specific research theme. So you want to make it as easy as possible for people to understand what you're proposing to do and understand mostly why it is important. So the rationale of what you're doing and why you chose it and what will be the impact. And moving on to impact. So what you want to think about is you want to explain the intended consequences of your study. So who will benefit from this in the short and the long term? And how do you plan to increase the chances of reaching these people who will benefit from your work? And do you have any direct or potential for improving human health, and in so, how and in what way? And in considering your impact and kind of weaving it throughout your application, you want to think about the balance between ambition and feasibility. Sure, your project should be interesting and high impact, but you should really avoid unrealistic or over-ambitious aims or designs. So you want to explain your work, but do not oversell it, as people will pick up on it. If possible, you want to include preliminary data. You want to provide enough of it to validate the approach that you've selected, and mostly to reassure the panel that you will be able to carry out the experiments and that you've identified a signal that's actually worth pursuing. If you don't have any preliminary data, you should consider what other published work you can use to support your approach and the rationale of your work. The next one is very important and often neglected, unfortunately, and you want to think about the risks of your proposal. You want to identify them and you want to show how you've mitigated them. So think about what could go wrong and what will you do to minimize those risks. What are your contingency plans if something doesn't go to plan? You want to show the reviewers and the panel members that you've thought about this and that you have, again, a concrete and viable plan to reduce the risks. Identifying your risks or your potential pitfalls will not weaken your proposal. In the contrary, just show reviewers that you fully understand the field that you work in, the limitation of your approach. You want to justify your methods and using statistics and think about why have you chosen the specific sample size, use power calculations. Again, it's a note that often comes up. You want to relate your methods to your aims and to your deliverables and show how it all ties together. If you're working on people or animals, you often want to think about salient parameters such as sex, genetic background, ethnicity, and the lengths. And finally, when you consider your requested resources, your budget, you want to make sure that all the requested costs are well justified by the experimental needs. At the same time, you want to make sure that the resources you request are enough to carry out the work. So don't ask for too much and don't ask for too little, and make sure that everything you ask for is well justified. And really important note here is around value for money. So value for money is one of the criteria MRC are looking at, but value for money doesn't necessarily mean low cost. So we will not fund research just because it's inexpensive, but we will look at the resource requested and see if it's indeed sufficient to meet the aims. Next slide, please. And finally, here we've identified a number of issues that tend to come up, especially from NIRG applications, and thought we might list them here to sort of just make you aware of them. So one issue is around scope and importance. And what you really want to do is try to find that middle ground between an application that's not over-ambitious and unrealistic on the one side, but on the other side, you don't want to submit a pedestrian, kind of unoriginal, boring proposal that will have a minimal knowledge gain, even if successful. The other issue is around clarity. Again, very important. You want to show that you have a clear hypothesis and that you can understand and you can kind of recognize whether or not you've been successful. You want your experimental plans to be very clear and sufficiently detailed so that people who read this can actually understand what you want to do and how you tend to test your hypothesis. When thinking about feasibility, make sure you think about things like, do you have access to all the required facilities, equipment, and people you need to deliver your research successfully? Again, identify the risk and indicate how you will mitigate them. And think about preliminary data if you can add it. And finally, and specific for the NIRG applications, is think about your career progression. So show within your proposal how this type of grant will help you achieve your goals and develop your independent research group and how you will be supported in this process. Okay, so finally, some thoughts around sources of advice. So we know it's not easy to write a good, strong proposal. And we thought just to highlight the fact that you can be potentially surrounded by people who can help you, and we've identified a few of those sources. So the first source is to look at the funders, and specifically for MRC, we will all be happy to speak with you and provide advice on your project and proposal ahead of applying. Look at our website, look for the named contacts that you will find anywhere on our website, in the description of our schemes and in the funding finder, and contact us well in advance. We'll be happy to talk to you. Within your university, you will have the university grants offices, and they can help you significantly with costing and technical issues around submitting your application. So do approach them, again, well ahead of time. Finally, we strongly advise that you engage experienced colleagues and collaborators, head of departments, anyone that will be able to help you. to develop a strong application and make sure that all your bases are covered. You should always be wary of bad advice. So ultimately, you are responsible for your own grant proposal and you make the final decisions. So we do encourage you to seek advice, but make sure you take ownership of your own work and your own proposal. And the final slide, please. Which luckily I do not have much to say about, but just to indicate that there's a long list of potential online resources on the MRC website, on the potential UKRI website, and other places. So we've listed a few of them. I will not go over them because I've talked too much anyway, but just so they are aware. And just to mention maybe, because I don't know if Andrew mentioned this, the final item here is gateway to research. So UKRI funded research. So UKRI uses funded and public money. So all of our funded research is public, and there's information about everything UKRI and MRC obviously have funded online. So if you're interested in looking at what types of things the different councils fund, budgets that people use, etc., you can check that out as well. So we'll move straight on to some accounts of personal experiences of NIRG award holders, so people who applied and were successful. And we'll hear from two people. So the first one will be Dr. Naomi Cray from the University of York, and I will let them introduce themselves as I think they will do it best.
Thank you so much for inviting me. The number of participants is very impressive. So again, thanks for the interest. It's really humbling to share some of my personal experience here. I am a senior research fellow, recently promoted. I think not small part thanks to having this NIRG. So thanks again for that. Now, senior research fellow at the Center of Health Economics, University of York, and I'm a health economist. So that's something I will return to. I was told not to talk too much about the details of the project, so I'm not going to do that. I'm going to tell you guys the title. So the title is Tailoring Health Policies to Improve Outcomes Using Machine Learning, Causal Inference, and Operations Research Methods. I started this project in 2020. This is a 3-year project, and I am funded for my time at 40% FT in this project. And well, this is a methodological project, as the title suggests. My aim is to apply and hopefully extend causal inference and machine learning techniques for the purposes of evaluating health policies to answer new questions which can give policymakers better, more granular evidence about the impact of policies. Particularly, I'm interested in estimating heterogeneity in policy effects, so to see which population subgroups benefit more or less from a health policy, such as social health insurance. And I'm hoping to take this further and try to learn from the data how we could actually tailor policies, how we could tailor the eligibility criteria of health policies in order to maximize population health, subject to some constraints, subject to considerations of not just total health, but equity as well. So this is the project. I'm a health economist, so I would like to bring in economic evaluation as well as policy impact evaluation. So why did I choose the NIRG path to pursue this project? Well, the first very pragmatic answer is that it really seemed like the right fit in my career pathway, or where I was a year and a half ago when I applied. So I trained as an economist originally in Hungary, and then did my PhD in health economics at LSHTM, funded by the ESRC. This was a PhD project which was not designed by me. It was designed by my supervisor, which I then sort of tailored for my own interests and taste. But by doing this project, which already was part of a larger research grant, I think I learned a lot on what it means to actually do funded research. So because of that, subsequently I took the courage and applied for a career fellow, an early career fellowship, which I think nowadays it's called the Skills Development Awards in the economics of health. And I did this for 3 years. So while on my CV, I do flag this up as my first PI project, but I think for the eligibility for the NIRG, it shouldn't be a problem, because it definitely wasn't a problem for me. So because it's a fellowship and not a grant, but MRC colleagues can clarify this. So again, because of this fellowship, I felt that having a focus time to really work on methods work is something which works very well for me, and I wanted to do it again. And in the meantime, I took a position at the Center for Health Economics at the University of York, and by the time I applied for the NIRG, this was a permanent position. The way my research organization operates is that everyone's position, if it's permanent, is subject to grant funding. We are not a teaching department. We make money from applying for grant funding. So because of this, by this time I was co-investigator on several research grants in York. Some of them I was the main analyst on, some of them I was advising on. So it was a very busy and very interesting line of work. I joined the Global Health Group, so there was many exciting policy relevant projects going on, and some of these really provided me with inspiration for case studies for my NIRG application. So my plan was to keep being linked with my project teams, my department, my smaller team, which was the Global Health Group, but at the same time carve out some time for myself to really pursue the methodological research, which I am excited about, and which I believe that if I do it well, it can really feed back into this global health research, which is done in my team. So how did I approach writing this NIRG application? Well, I aimed at the application at the MRC methodology research panel. This is the panel which is now called the Better Methods, Better Research funding panel. And well, it was fairly obvious to me why I want to do this. I was familiar with how this works from my fellowship, and also I believe that due to my interest, this is really the best fit for me, the methodology research panel. And I just added some numbers here. I think that's okay to share, and I'm pretty sure many people are interested in like how much I applied for. I applied for around 400,000. I think we managed to stay a little bit below, or we went a little bit over. It was quite a juggle to make sure the numbers don't go very far. Turns out due to indirect costs, things even if a grant such as mine doesn't require really expensive things like primary data collection, which I didn't have, numbers can really add up. So this is 40% of my time, 100% of one postdoctoral research fellow salary for 2 years, and 2 smaller chunks of postdoctoral research fellow salary, and very small amount of co-investigator time, and some travel, conference, dissemination budget. In terms of the content, well, so what I really focused on is to build on my methodological work from the past, which has been causal machine learning, my main interest, but bring in other methods areas which I believe would really create a better framework to tackle these issues. So this is decision modeling, operations research, and computer science, which I brought in through new collaborations. And because of the case studies, the exemplars I was planning to use, I also built on ongoing collaborations with academics and policymakers from Indonesia and Brazil, where the data is coming from. So on the grant, I named one co-investigator, a computer science colleague who is now in Bristol. Back then he was in York, so that's how we could connect. And one other collaborator who we, for administrative reasons, mainly we ended up not naming as a co-investigator, but he is a named collaborator from Harvard. And beyond this, I tapped into my network of previous collaborators, supervisors, co-authors, and I built a rather large advisory group, actually 2 of them. I have 2 advisory groups for this project. One is methods advisory group, health economists, statisticians, experts in causal inference, and the other one is around policy and impact, which I believe is really important to make sure that these methods which we are developing really going to go somewhere. So this is how it looked like, and well, what really helped me in the process is use some sort of framework. We can call it a conceptual framework. We can call it like the way I structure the project into work packages, methodological approaches, case studies, dissemination. This was quite helpful for me to structure my thoughts. Was quite helpful when I was showing my drafts to colleagues and those collaborators who were helping me to develop this grant. And I believe that it was probably somewhat helpful for the reviewers to quickly have a feel for what I'm trying to do. In terms of some practicalities of how the actual writing of the grant application went. So I submitted this in 2019, November. I took 1 week off in 2019 June to really focus on writing this grant application. This doesn't mean that I started it then. I have the intellectual work and bits and pieces here and there started like almost a year ago, I think in 2018. But due to working on several competing projects, having students, I felt that I really need to take a week off. And this also meant I had to like physically remove myself from the office, which is quite funny now thinking of it. Back then we had to ask for a favor to not be in the office for a week, and now we have to ask for a favor to actually be able to go there, but we didn't know that. So I did that, and that really helped me to come up with the first draft, which then I could start circulating. And I went through informal peer review. I reached out to everyone whose opinion I trusted and asked them for feedback, but I also went through a rigorous formal peer review process in New York, which is necessary to when we are applying for grants. So I got loads of help from academic colleagues and support staff, and I would like to emphasize the finance team here. So my job really was to actually think of what I would need, and they were extremely helpful in putting numbers to it. So the justification of resources document is actually very, very important. And I worked in tandem with the finance team, me coming up with ideas of what resources we would need, and they putting some numbers on that. So I didn't have to actually worry that I screw up the finances. So that was very, very nice. Well, we submitted it. We got reviewers' comments a couple of months later, and these comments were very relevant, and it really helped us to think through a couple of more important things, like, is this really doable? Is this innovative? Is this research really needed? We also got some reality check about a data management plan. Turns out, even if you use secondary data, you actually have to be quite rigorous on where you're going to store this and what you're going to do about it. And if I think about what I would maybe do a little bit different, I might ask for more direct help in writing from my co-investigators, because it was the process was very, I was really keeping it in my own hand, and maybe that could have been done differently. So just to show you how it actually looked in the night before the deadline, I actually happened to be in South Africa for work. Again, that time we could still travel for giving a talk, so I traveled there, and it was 3 a.m. And I was uploading 20-30 different bits of documents on the Jazz. That did take longer than expected, although like the content was done, but little things like not having a date on a letter of support, for example, and then having to contact the person who wrote a letter of support and asking them to sign it, things like that kind of sneaked in at the last minute, but I managed to submit it. Again, very much thanks to help from the support staff. And so where I am right now, I'm at 1 year and 3 months. I think the biggest achievement was to recruit a really excellent research fellow, postdoctoral research fellow who is instrumental in leading on core bits of the research now. So we are working a lot. We are talking a lot on Zoom. The pandemic obviously made some of the planned activities, such as research visits, conference attendance, be different, limited, or virtual. But virtual communication has been going okay. We had our first advisory group meeting virtual. We had our first dissemination, policymaker engagement, even virtually. We are having a second advisory group, probably hybrid. Hopefully, some people can come, and maybe some of the research visits which we planned will happen. Some challenges which I thought about when I thought this through. Well, the objective of the NIRG is to take us through to independence, and I'm certainly learning how to lead a small research team, learning how to juggle several projects while trying to really get some focus work done on this one. On 40% FTE is certainly a challenge. I have taken several little courses in how to manage a project. That's a work in progress. So I think we all agree that that's something we learn by doing. And finally, it would be very useful to have some visibility for the project. This is definitely on me. It's important to get things out, maybe have a website even, so to really reach broader audiences. That's it from me. I hope I didn't take up too much time, and I stop sharing now. I'm very happy to answer any questions. Hopefully some of this was useful.
I would now like to invite Dr. Avinash Shenoy from Imperial College London. Sorry.
Thank you. So thank you for inviting me, and I'm humbled to be asked to share my experience as a NIRG. It's been some years, and it's kind of nice because when I started, I had the benefit of advice from generous colleagues. So I'm glad to share some of my experience with all of you, and will be really glad if I can be of any help. Secondly, MRC have been front and center for my career so far. I have received a NIRG from them and subsequently received 2 research grants in the last couple of years. So thanks a lot to the MRC. And again, I am also based at an MRC center at Imperial College, which is the MRC Center for Molecular Bacteriology and Infection. So I think that also gives you an idea of what I do. It's mostly infection biology and innate immunity. I'm not going to talk about any of my science today, actually. But I also want to clarify that being at an MRC center doesn't mean that we get any core support. I do not get any consumables from on a flat basis. All of my lab is run on grants, one on competitive schemes. What we do get is the benefit of having a cross-faculty center, networking, a PhD program, and of course some facilities that the MRC helped fund, put together, and one of which I actually co-manage. I also have a satellite appointment at the CRIC, which again gives me the benefit of the PhD program, networking, facilities. But again, I do not get any core funding from the CRIC. So again, all of my bread and butter comes through grants from the MRC at the moment. So with that, what I'm going to do is take about the next 10 minutes to tell you about my particular situation and how I started where I am. And I think it'll give an idea of my particular case, because despite whatever advice you get, in most cases, things are specific to the unique applicant and things can be quite unique. So I'm just to give you my background and how I got here. So I started as a lecturer in molecular microbiology at Imperial College in 2013. That meant at the time I was instantly ineligible for any of the 5-year awards, sort of the career development fellowships and so on. So the NIRGs, as you've heard, are 3-year awards usually, and that's what I have. I was in a probation for 3 years, which I passed. I was then promoted to senior lecturer and more recently to reader in innate immunity and infection. That's what I'm now. And to be promoted at Imperial College, there are 4 different things at least that you need to be doing, which is research, which is most of the time that I spent. And in the first 3 or 4 years, I was full-time at the bench. We'll go to the bench, and I'm not sure my students and postdocs enjoy me that much, having me around that much at the bench. I also teach a fair bit. I'm the stream lead for a master's course at Imperial College. I take lectures, workshops, assessments, and so on. I also am involved in a fair bit of management. all of this has gradually increased over time. So I didn't have a lot of responsibilities at the beginning, which was good, and I could focus more on my research starting on. So my journey as a scientific researcher started in India. I'm from India. I'm Indian origin, and I did my BSc degree in microbiology and biotechnology in Mumbai. I then went on to do an integrated master's and PhD at Indian Institute of Science in Bengaluru, from where I then went to do a postdoc, so a sort of a longish postdoc at Yale University in the Department of Microbial Pathogenesis, again working on host pathogen interactions, innate immunity, and so on. And that's what I brought and started my own group in. And this is just again to give you a little bit bits and pieces of my CV. I had a few prizes from my BSc degree. I had a fairly good, productive PhD, several papers. It was mostly microbiology and biochemistry. In my postdoc, also, I had a fairly successful postdoc, a long one, but a successful one. And I learned a lot of things that I then tied together. And my current lab brings in strands from my PhD as well as my postdoc to investigate infection biology. So what have my funding attempts and strategies been in the past few years? Because starting a lab and writing a grant go hand in hand, this is a little bit of a tip of when you start your new lab. This was the advice that I received, and so I'm passing it on. Mainly be selective in the staff and trainees you pick, and you will see why that is important, because that worked really well for me in my attempts to get my first grant. Everyone will want to collaborate with you, because usually when you join a new place, it's because you bring some new skills and new concepts and new resources. And you might want to learn to say no, which I did. I also actively seek mentoring and advice. I go to people and say, can I get your help on this? Can you read my draft? Can you give me your thoughts on this manuscript, and so on? I also get them people outside Imperial to read my grants and manuscripts often. And I think when I started, it was hugely beneficial for me to speak to senior postdocs at Imperial when I started. So local postdocs who helped me a lot on a day-to-day basis, because I wasn't from Imperial. I wasn't even from the UK. I came completely fresh. So that is what I did, and I think it stood me in good stead so far. So here's my grant history. There was pluses and minuses. When I started, I immediately wrote that a Royal Society Award, which is a small one, about 10 to 15K, but it's quite useful. I then wrote my first NIRG in about 3 months or so after starting my own group. So this was January 2014. It scored about 8 out of 10 in the Infection and Immunity Board, so IIB, but it was not funded, which is quite disappointing. But I was told, and again, I think colleagues at MRC are very communicative, so it's good to keep in touch. I was told I was unlucky because funding ran out. And actually 8 is a fundable score, but it was tight budgets. One of the comments that I want to mention, and just rephrasing a lot of reviewers' comments, was large parts of my first grant were descriptive rather than hypothesis-driven. So the message I took from that was a hypothesis-driven grant is preferred. There were some gratuitous comments that I do not want to repeat, and as far as I know, despite their presence, it did not affect the decision because the score was pretty good. I then applied to the BBSRC, and my grant scored really badly. I have not yet had the courage to go back to them, and I hope I will go back to them at some point. But that project definitely was more within medical research councils for the MRC remit, because a lot of work that I do is infection biology or immunology related to disease. And so I think that project was not within the BBSRC remit, but they did review it, and it was a bit disappointing to not get good scores. I then received a Welcome Seed Award, which was useful because I could then just put my head down and get on with some research in my lab. Because that was the advice that I received between the first 2 or 3 years of having my own group. And the advice, and I would recommend that to you too, is do not give up, keep going, because success and failure are part of the job. Publish a good paper before going back for another grant was a very strong advice I got, and I took that seriously, and that's what I still do. I was always also advised to go as an observer to an MRC panel, which I did, and this was extremely useful. I think during the pandemic, this has been a bit more difficult, but if MRC ever run this again, I would recommend you apply and get in touch to go and observe one of the panels. So what worked for me during these few years that I was between a failed grant and trying to go back to the MRC for another grant was the excellent PhD students and support from colleagues. So being at Imperial College, one of the advantages is that we get excellent students, excellent rotation students, including UG and PG students. And that helped me have more people in the group to do more experiments, to try new things, to try more ambitious things, and so on. I also had good access to facilities, including kit from other groups, just my colleagues on the same floor or within the building. I had free access to all of this. I sought mentoring, as I said, and I feel a lot of people are hesitant to contact senior members of staff, and I would encourage you to just reach out. I think most people are more than happy to help you. For example, the help I received was joint lab meetings, just sounding boards for advice and ideas and strategies, feedback on drafts. I also had low administrative and teaching duties when I started, so I was left alone for some time. And I also had some examples of successful grants from colleagues. So the support system does matter, and I think it was useful in my case. And so what did I not know when I applied first in 2014 that I did then come to know over the next few years? And I think some of these points have been mentioned before, but I think it's good to reiterate. Budgets take some time to develop. And that is mostly because there are several layers of approval before they are submitted to the MRC. These are your own research offices at your universities and institutes, and this takes some time. So start this process really early. Other parts of the grant also take a lot of time, including pathways to impact, the justification, the data management, and so on. It takes much longer to write these than you realize. So start as early as you can. Peer review scores only matters so much. I think the wording of the comments from reviewers matters more, and the panel's opinion definitely counts higher or more than the reviewer scores. That's my opinion. And addressing the panel's comments. So when I got reviews comments, the panel also made certain comments that they wished me to address. And I prioritized addressing those over reviewers' comments because there's only limited space for review for your rebuttal. Hypothesis-driven aims are better received. And a recent publication helps to show independence and deliverability, especially if you're using the latest cutting-edge technologies in proteomics or next-gen sequencing or whatever else it is. I think a recent publication to show that you can deliver on such promises definitely helps. And so that's what I did. So I applied again in about 2016, and it was an entirely new grant. It had nothing to do with my previous grant. I had just published a paper in Cell Reports, and I think it's a reputed journal. It has good visibility. I'd submitted the grant when the paper was being revised. So that's a bit of a risk, but the reviewers would have been able to see the manuscript online as they were reviewing it. So my deliverability and ability to do some stuff was quite clear independently, that is. The strategy the strategy was I had hypothesis-driven aims 1 and 2 with very strong preliminary data, of course, from the manuscript and some other data. Aim 3 was a bit more ambitious, and if you know a little bit about infection biology, we decided to make a new knockout mouse, for example. But again, I had a lot of experience in working with mice in the past, so this was a bit more open-ended. I had a lot of comments. I had a range of scores from, I think, 4 to 6, and there was a small page limit. There's only a 3-page limit, I think, which is slightly different now. But use this wisely when you respond to the reviewers' comments. So that's what happened to me, and that was a successful grant. And so what I try to do now is to rework the successful strategy, which is basically establish fruitful collaborations. Both of my successful grants subsequent to this one have had collaborators, international or national within the UK. And I try wherever possible to publish a manuscript related to the grant before I apply for the grant. I start as early as possible. And as Naomi said as well, I've had, I don't know how many drafts. Most of my grants have had at least 20 drafts before the final one gets submitted. I usually get them read by at least one senior member and a junior member, not necessarily in my area, someone who knows a little bit about immunology or something about microbiology, but not necessarily much about it. In terms of writing the grant, what I try to do is usually outline the importance and the impact and hypothesis as early as possible and as clearly as possible. And one of the best pieces of advice I've gotten as far as writing a grant is concerned is write it for a tired reviewer on a commute back home. So if someone like that can read and understand it, then you've done a good job. And I think that's good advice. I would also suggest tailoring the research environment to the grant, which is basically what are your colleagues, what is a collaborator doing there, what are the research facilities you have. Don't make them generic statements. They have to be tailored to the grant, I think. Bullet lists are useful. Schematics are useful. I've always used schematics that summarize a lot of complex information in small cartoons. And I've always used these alongside preliminary data. Again, something that someone once mentioned to me, preliminary data sounds like it's initial data, but it's supposed to be solid. It's supposed to be unquestionably solid. That forms the foundation of your grant. It can't be rocky and it can't be questioned. So that is something that you should keep in mind. The preliminary data has to be really good data. And I think, again, Maya and others have mentioned this in the beginning, I think, is that address risk mitigation strategies and innovations. Be clear about what is the risk, be clear about how you're going to mitigate them, and also just spell out the innovations that you've made in your grant. And again, please use the reproducibility framework and statistical annex that they recommend, but they don't mandate it. I think it just should be mandated, because when I went as an observer, I realized that is something that they take really seriously. And so it's good to include. So this is my last slide. I think what worked overall, my strategy has been publish and then apply. Start as early as possible, seek support and mentoring, because it won't come to you unless you reach out. Hypothesis-driven aims, in my case, have always worked better. Good preliminary data, impact and rationale to be clarified. Observing the MRC panel really helped me develop my grant and aims and the way I form the narrative around my grant. As I've said, I've received 2 subsequent MRC research grants, so I'm extremely thankful, and that's led to where I am now. What could have been better? Maybe slightly longer than 3-year grant, maybe a follow-up grant, which in some fellowships they exist now. It was tough in recruitment because it is neither MRC nor my fault, but Brexit made recruitment really tough, and in the last year or two during COVID, it's been really tough finding money to maintain mouse colonies, because mice have just been sitting when we couldn't really do the experiments. But again, not MRC's fault clearly, but we did get some additional help to top up some of the money during COVID-related lockdown. So that's about it. Here's my email, and I'm also on Twitter. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to help, and I'm going to stay around for the Q&A. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. Just wanted to say 2 fantastic talks from Naomi and Avinash there. And I think hearing your first-hand experiences is something extremely valuable. So thank you everyone who's populated the Q&A. We've got a number of questions to work through. We're going to try and work through them all. We'll start off with hopefully some of the questions directed to 2 of the speakers that you've just heard from. How did you decide on 40% full-time equivalent when you can apply for up to 50% on the NIRG? Did you discuss this with your head of school to negotiate a teaching load or admin load? So Naomi, if you're able or happy to answer that question.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to. So, well, as I alluded to, salary costs really do add up. So when I put together my dream budget, it was huge. So, and like I think being an observer at previous MRC board meetings, in particular methods panel, I had a feel for what's too much. And we really took that into account, and we tried to optimize within those constraints and try to come up with this solution that 40% of my salary, that would still give me really hopefully sufficient focus, but we would have enough money to do what is really important, I think, is to support at least one full-time postdoctoral research fellow. This is a methodological project, so I was fairly convinced that this could be actually a very nice career opportunity for someone else, not just me. And we wanted to make sure there is sufficient budget remaining for that. And of course, I did discuss this with my line manager and head of department.
Thank you, Naomi. And Avinash, I don't know, did you have discussions about whether the amount of time you'd be attributing to the MRC?
Yeah, actually I did. And strangely, there was some comment about too much of my time having been attributed on the NIRG, on my first NIRG. It was a 2014 NIRG that did not come through. But for the second one, then we put less because of that comment, which is a bit strange, but we did put less, and it was about 20% of my time. But it was largely because of that strange comment that 10% was too much from a reviewer. So, yeah.
Thank you. Another question was how important was a postdoc fellowship with the MRC? So I think this directed at Naomi again. And do you think that contributed to getting the NIRG? So maybe again, Naomi, if we start with you, and then Avinash, I know that you also had
so of course I don't know how the MRC thinks behind the closed doors, but the MRC fellowship was extremely important for me. It was the most important thing which could have happened to my career in terms of having that gift of focusing for 3 years one methodological topic, being able to do overseas research visits. And I think the learning from this, the outputs from this, and the collaborations I built through this have all strengthened my application. So I don't know if I had done this through another funder but had the same outcomes. I would hope that would have counted the same extent. But I don't know. So that's maybe for the MRC to comment.
Now, Avinash, I don't know if you wanted to comment on previous funding success leading to future success.
So yeah, I think in my case, I'm starting from the NIRG. I think my subsequent research grants have been helped from my NIRG and the outputs that I could produce from the NIRG. But I was not based in the UK before, so I didn't have any UK-based fellowships, but I did have some postdoctoral fellowships when I was in the US. And so that helps the CV, I think, but other than that, nothing direct. I didn't have an independent fellowship, so no.
Thank you. So there's been a couple of questions on advisory panel and advisory groups. So asking, do they do this out of the goodness of their heart, or is there any benefit for them? We're just wondering how you'd convince people to take on this role. So again, thoughts on that, maybe again to Naomi. I think you've done some written responses. Or
I think goodness of heart is a very crucial aspect here. We can't promise people authorship or anything like very tangible, when the project hasn't even started and not even funded. So I think it's important that we find people who think that the topic is interesting and they are happy to chat about it, and they are happy to support me, whatever happens. So that's so most of the people who I selected to be on the advisory board. I had some previous relationships, such as PhD supervision or mentorship at a conference. I involve new people, and that has been mostly throughout recommendations of my senior colleagues, and them I managed to convince by the coolness of my methodological research topic. Who doesn't want to work with causal machine learning methods these days? So that I think that was lucky in that sense, that I had a cool topic. So that's kind of my subjective opinion of that. Ideally, some of these advisory group members, other than really nicely donating their time, so I have just scheduled a 3-hour meeting for March for the second advisory group, and hopefully they will be all there on the Zoom at least. Some of them may become co-authors if they are interested in doing so. So one of my advisory group members is already an active co-author on one of our outputs.
Thank you, Naomi. Was there anything you wanted to add, Avinash? Your experience?
I had a named mentor on my NIRG, and I think in addition to that mentor, I did pester a lot of other senior people when I needed advice. So I think I didn't care what they thought, but in the end, they were really helpful. So I think a lot of senior people are more than happy to help. And subsequently, I've usually just collaborated with people on projects, and that's led to some wonderful grants subsequently.
Excellent. We sometimes get a lot of questions about the budget that people can ask for and what they can request on it. So there was a specific question for you, Avinash, on what budget and time you request, and how many postdoctoral research assistant positions did you have on your grant?
Yeah, I had one postdoctoral fellow, so PDRA, and one part-time technician on my NIRG when I started. So that technician, justified because we were working with mice and we needed additional help for the last year. So it was part-time, but the postdoc was 3 years.
Excellent. And Naomi, do you want to say what you had on yours?
So yes, I said I have one full-time postdoctoral fellow for 2 years. So again, ideally it would have been nicer for 3 years, but budget's allowing. We did it for 2 years, and then two more for 25% for 1 year each. These are for more specific tasks. So we already managed to hire one person for this 25% task who used to be a PhD student. Yeah, so that these are the main staff costs, and co-investigators very small amount of time budgeted for.
Sorry, Andrew, if I can just comment about costs real quickly, not to create the wrong impression. So MRC deliberately doesn't have a maximum cap on costs. And the guidance is that you should apply for what you think you really and truly need to carry out your research in time and as intended, and the maximum chances of success, and all just needs to be justified in the proposal. So we will fund strong applications if the costs are justified.
Excellent. Another question we get asked quite a lot is sort of, I suppose, how to find that middle ground between having sufficient ambition or being sufficiently innovative enough, but also being able to convince the board that you'll be able to deliver on your proposed research. I don't know whether, Avinash or Naomi, you had those discussions when you were putting together your application about how to get that sweet middle spot to please everybody.
Yeah, maybe I'm happy to go first. So at Imperial College, our grants also get reviewed internally, and I think Naomi also said something similar. So it's at that step that some of these things get caught in terms of whether it's too ambitious or just a little bit of an extension of previous work. So I think this thing evolves if you speak to more senior people who have written more grants or are more knowledgeable, who've sat on panels, who've reviewed a lot of grants. I think advice from others, more senior people, is what helped.
Anything you wish to add, Naomi?
I agree with that. So I think when I show this thing to people and they got excited about it and they had questions, but they didn't think that this is completely left field and not not doable. That made me somewhat comfortable. I mean, I think it does help that I structured it as 3 work packages, which are build on each other. And towards the first work package, there was a lot of groundwork being done already at the time of applying, and then the second work package, it includes things which are already very innovative, and hopefully most of them will be done. The third work package is somewhat futuristic, and again, hopefully we will manage to get a good start on that. But I do think that things are more difficult than they sometimes seem when we write them down on a proposal. So I think that we have so many objectives and outputs planned. Getting most of them done will be quite satisfactory, even if not all of them will be done.
Excellent, thank you. So a question for Avinash. Could you please elaborate a bit more on your risk mitigation, especially the reproducibility framework you mentioned? And what were the hardest panel comments you had and how did you address them? So yeah, maybe focus on the first points too, in terms of risk mitigation.
Yeah, the risk mitigation, I think it's very related to the question you're addressing. So I don't think I can give a generic response. I mean, most of my work is very molecular mechanistic investigations in molecular signaling, or how a pathogen causes virulence, or how the host responds to a particular infection. And so the mitigation here is, for example, if we hypothesized XYZ approach would be not hypothesized, we said we would use experimental approach A, but there's a chance that may not work. So you then suggest an experimental approach B or C, or if the hypothesis entirely fails or something else comes up, then you say we would pursue something else which is related to this, but something else. So it's clear that you've thought about it. I think the idea of risk mitigation is to show that you've thought about alternatives than anything. It just shouldn't come out as something that the aim entirely would fail. In terms of the reproducibility framework, it's a 1-page annex. I think there's good advice on the MRC website, but I usually mention power calculations. I mention the experimental models. I don't go into methods, but more the statistical approach and power calculations and so on.
Thank you. Naomi, anything you wanted to add in terms of risk mitigation?
So we use secondary data, which I think that's somewhat less risky than using primary data, spending a lot of resources on it, and then something not working out. So the secondary data we use tends to be publicly available. So we have suggested several alternative data sources if some don't seem to suit or methods inquiry as well. So I think that was one to make sure that we are not putting all our methods eggs in one data basket. And in terms of how much statistical analysis planning we were doing, so well, these are machine learning methods using observational data. So there are no very clear-cut answers of how many data points and how many variables are perfect. Some of the methodological inquiry is exactly about that, to really try this out. So again, I think for methods research, even a result which says something doesn't work is a valuable result, because that's exactly what we were trying to find out. And you can always use simulated data, and then you are sure about the truth. So well, but this is still something we are dealing with. Which data sets we end up choosing from the available ones.
Perfect, thank you. I think we'll have to draw this webinar to an end right now. So thank you everyone for attending. I think hopefully it's been worthwhile. And again, thank you to Naomi and Avinash for 2 excellent talks and answering lots of questions. I say this is just the first event that we're hoping to run this year. We're hoping to run similar events throughout the year, either similar webinars or making more of sort of university strategic visits. So please do keep going back to the NIRG web pages, where that's a place where we'll be updating the information. And yes, thank you for attending, and have a good rest of the day, and potentially see you shortly in one of the breakout rooms if you wish. Otherwise, have a good afternoon. Thank you.